In today's video, I'll be discussing how former President Donald Trump could retake the presidency with just 2 states, and why those 2 states right now look particularly favorable for the former president. First off, we look at the state of Georgia. Georgia has historically been a very red state in favor of the Republican Party. If you look at the state of Georgia in 2022, you'll see that Republicans won almost all of the statewide races. In the governor's race, Brian Kemp, the incumbent Republican, defeated Stacey Abrams, a very well-funded Democrat, by 7.5 points. If you look at all these down-ballot races here, Lieutenant Governor, Attorney General, Agricultural Commissioner, Insurance Commissioner, Labor Commissioner, School Superintendent, Secretary of State, you can see that all of these Republicans won re-election by at least 5%, if not more. Some of these candidates were not even incumbents, and they were able to win by really solid margins. Additionally, even incumbent Democrat Raphael Warnock, who was facing off arguably against a pretty weak candidate who had not resided in a state for a pretty long time, Herschel Walker, still ended up being forced into a runoff after leading by less than 1% in the statewide numbers. Having said that, how does former President Donald Trump end up retaking the state of Georgia from Joe Biden's column? Well, there are 2 things he could do. The first thing is to run up huge margins in the rural areas and boost turnout. Now, you might say that these rural areas are very sparsely populated and that making some improvements won't really do the job. However, you have to look at this collectively. Firstly, you look at these rural areas. These are very favorable areas for Donald Trump. For example, take Little Dade County. That was roughly a 5-to-1 margin more than that in favor of the former president. Additionally, you have to look at the fact that these counties are essentially very small itself, but are pretty large collectively. For instance, again, if you look at Little Dade County, that's only about 7,300 votes total that came out of this county back in 2020. However, this netted a pretty substantial margin of about 4,800 votes for Donald Trump. Take another county, for example, Walker County, right? Slightly bigger population, that netted 17,400 votes for former President Trump. And when you look at all of these counties together, you'll see that these areas boost huge numbers for Trump. And if he's able to improve by 1% in every county, or boost turnout by 1% in every one of these counties, guess what? He ends up winning the state by roughly a 0.2% margin or so. Although that may seem very small and insignificant, that type of boost, and also the fact that, again, these may not seem like a lot of votes. When you look at them collectively, if Trump is able to really appeal to some of these rural voters, that could really help him win the state. The second and more obvious pathway lies in the Atlanta suburbs. Now, as we all know, the Atlanta suburbs are a relatively moderate part of the state that has heavily trended towards the Democratic Party in recent decades, and there's no point to dispute that. If you look at the 2020 numbers, some of these counties shifted heavily towards Joe Biden compared to Hillary Clinton. Take Gwinnett County, for instance. Hillary Clinton only won this county over Donald Trump by a margin of 6%. However, Joe Biden tripled that margin to about 18% back in 2020. However, someone like Kamala Harris may not have the strength that someone like Kamala Harris may not have the coalition that Joe Biden had in some of the suburban counties in 2020. For instance, if you look at the same county I just mentioned a few seconds ago, Gwinnett County, again, this is a very populated area of the state. Roughly about 1 in 12 voters in the entire state live in this one county, which means that the county makes up more than 8% of the population here. What we see is that there's a lot of voters who are more willing to vote for Biden because he was classified and considered as more of a moderate than someone like Kamala Harris. Although Harris has been trying to moderate her positions on many of the issues, that may not appeal to many of these college-educated white voters, which was a key demographic group in ensuring Joe Biden's victory back in 2020. So as you can see, definitely there's no guarantee that Kamala Harris is able to win all of those voters that Joe Biden flipped from the Donald Trump column or from the abstaining vote column back in 2016. And considering how small Joe Biden's victory was over Donald Trump in the state of Georgia back in 2020, it's unsurprising that even a small movement or maybe a slight boost in numbers in some of these more suburban counties could significantly benefit Donald Trump and help him win the state. As right now, I also believe that the state of Georgia will go to the Republican Party. Although there are some figures suggesting that Kamala Harris, for example, in the polling, suggesting that Harris is favored, the general political consensus is that Georgia is a state that has been narrowly favoring Donald Trump since the beginning of this campaign season, back when Joe Biden was the candidate, and throughout now. So at this point in time, I'm going to give the state of Georgia to Donald Trump, and that is the first of two states that Trump needs to win in order to clinch the presidency. Now, as you can see, Donald Trump is at 251 electoral college votes, assuming he wins all the states that he won back in 2020, which at this point, again, it can't be taken for granted from the Trump campaign, but is something that is incredibly likely. The second state is a state that we've all been talking about, the state of Pennsylvania. Now, Pennsylvania is very unique because it's a state that has the largest electoral vote presence out of all the competitive states in the 2024 presidential election. Now, if you look at polling right now in Pennsylvania, it may seem like that someone like Kamala Harris may actually be favored here. As you can see, Harris is up by 0.7%. However, there are two things to take a note of. The first thing was that Harris's lead was a bit larger back in August, and her numbers have actually slipped a little bit, despite the fact that the Democratic National Convention just finished about a week ago, and that her numbers should be in a pretty solid honeymoon period. Additionally, even if her numbers actually stay at the same, roughly about a 1% lead, give or take, for Kamala Harris in the state of Pennsylvania, that's still not very good news for the former vice president. For one thing, if you look at 2020, Joe Biden consistently held roughly a 3 to 7% lead in the state of Pennsylvania throughout the election cycle, starting from late April all the way up to November the 3rd on election day. Despite this, he only won the actual state by 1.2%. You can say that polling roughly underestimated Donald Trump by 3.5 points. Now, I'm not trying to say that every single election is the same. Obviously, every election is somewhat different. However, there is an expectation here that someone like Donald Trump, who has historically been underestimated, will probably be again underestimated in 2024. And given how narrow the lead is for Kamala Harris, this is certainly not that good of a piece of news for Harris that she's only leading by 0.7%. Additionally, if you look at Pennsylvania, there's a lot of demographics that are quite favorable for Donald Trump. Firstly, the state has a pretty substantial rural presence. Of course, the urban area around Philadelphia, as well as some of the more suburban counties, may favor Democrats. However, the state has a surprisingly pretty substantial number of rural counties. And in fact, some of these rural counties are pretty populated. If you just look through some of these, Lincoln County, that's around 60,000 votes in 2020. Westmoreland, that's like 200,000 votes. Huntington, that's 22,000 votes. Blair County, that's 63,000 votes. And although these are again seemingly insignificant counties in terms of the net vote totals, these produce significant numbers for Donald Trump. Now, there's a couple of things that Donald Trump could end up doing in order for him to actually win the state. The first thing is something that's quite unexpected. It's to improve in Philadelphia. That's right, the big blue center of Philadelphia. And there's a couple of data points that suggest that he may be able to do that. In 2020, for instance, despite the fact that Joe Biden overperformed Hillary Clinton by roughly 2%, statewide in the state of Pennsylvania, Philadelphia County actually shifted 3.5% towards Donald Trump, which was something that most news commentators didn't see coming, and it was something that was relatively overlooked because of the fact that Joe Biden ultimately won the state. However, this is a significant trend. If you look at voter registration, Democrats have dropped pretty substantially in Philadelphia, and Donald Trump has significantly risen. And if the trend continues, you could probably see Donald Trump about overperform his 2020 numbers there by again around 3 to 5 points. That in of itself will net Donald Trump at least 20,000 votes in this one county alone. The second pathway for Donald Trump to win here is probably to run up the numbers in the rural areas. For instance, Donald Trump was attempted to be assassinated in Butler County, Pennsylvania, which is roughly 50 miles north of Philadelphia. And those type of numbers are really going to end up driving up his numbers in some of the rural areas. Sure, you might say an assassination attempt is not something that's directly attributed to Kamala Harris, but again, voters feel sympathetic for the candidate that was targeted, and in this case, you're going to see a lot of these rural numbers just skyrocket for Donald Trump, because again, he was almost assassinated in Pennsylvania, especially in some of these rural counties, as well as the fact that turnout is essentially higher than ever in some of these regions. And if Trump is able to boost turnout just slightly in some of these counties, he doesn't even have to improve in the margins. He should be able to win the state of Pennsylvania, combining with the fact of Philadelphia. The third thing that really goes in favor of Donald Trump is some of these suburban counties. Now, someone like Kamala Harris will indisputably do pretty well in the suburban areas around Philadelphia, for example, Delaware County, Chester County, and Montgomery County, because those are the areas where Democrats are improving. However, the white working class areas, Bucks County, relatively less affluent compared to some of the other suburban counties, as well as Allentown, right, Northampton, Monroe, Lackawanna County, Luzerne County, right, these are historically very Democratic areas. Even in a county like Luzerne, for instance, this was a county that voted for Obama in 2008. Lackawanna County was a county that voted for Obama by 25% in 2012, an election that had a similar popular vote as 2020. You can see how much Democrats have regressed in some of those regions. For example, again, Lackawanna County, if you look at some of the trends, of course Joe Biden did better than Hillary Clinton. However, he still underperformed Obama in that county by 18%. And with someone like Kamala Harris, someone who's more out of touch with some of these working class voters, as many electorates would perceive it, than someone like Joe Biden, that could certainly hamper her numbers in some of these counties. And although, again, Lackawanna County not very significant in of itself, there's a lot of Lackawanna counties in the state. Monroe County, Northampton County, Lehigh County, even Bucks County to a certain extent, as well as Erie County. These are all areas where I would expect someone like Donald Trump to improve in. Joe Biden was someone who did pretty well with some of these white working class voters compared to some of the other Democrats and their performances there. And I do believe that someone like Donald Trump, again, someone like Kamala Harris, will probably improve in some of these regions and end up winning the state of Pennsylvania. I would certainly say right now Donald Trump is favored to win Pennsylvania, and if he wins Pennsylvania and Georgia, he wins the presidential election. In summary, by Donald Trump holding all the states he won in the 2020 election and flipping the states of Georgia and Pennsylvania to states that were decided by a combined total of roughly 90,000 votes in 2020, Trump could easily end up flipping off the presidency. This is a very easy yet convenient path for Donald Trump, and it garners him exactly 270 electoral college votes. Now, this is not the ceiling for Trump. He could win all of these toss-up states, and maybe even add a state like Virginia, Minnesota, New Hampshire, or even Maine into the column of a Republican victory. However, this is a pretty simple path for Trump, and this is why I believe that Trump is favored. He can simply win these two states that were very competitive in 2020 and 2022, and he could just win the election like that. He doesn't even need to go to Wisconsin, Michigan, Arizona, or Nevada, states that he has really good chances in, and just has to stick to two states, Pennsylvania and Georgia, where he is indeed spending a lot of his funds in, and indeed seem to suggest that these states are probably going to go for Donald Trump. Hey guys, thank you for watching today's video. Be sure to like and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you haven't. Consider joining my memberships. It's for as little as $1.99 per month, and you get a lot of perks. Obviously, don't feel pressure to do that. If you don't have the money or simply don't want to, that's perfectly fine. Thank you for watching. Have a nice day. Goodbye.